So tonight, a slightly different one. We're going to revisit two videos I made last year for sick bicycles. Now, I know sick bicycles are a slightly controversial topic and a sore point for a lot of people these days, and there's a lot of "I told you so's" going around. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not involved with the company. I never was. I never received anything for gratis or for services. I have no connection with the company. My relationship goes as far as in a few really interesting conversations with Tim and Jordan about bike geometry and design and suspension kinematics and what they thought worked and why they're doing things a certain way, which ultimately culminated in an interview about how I saw the company operating as an external, looking in at it, with a kind of giving a wee critique of my view, kind of like applying my art school background to how this small entity was existing. And since then, did a few videos for them to kind of help broaden my presence online, and also put a few other voices on their YouTube channel. But after doing two of them that were kind of like tech philosophy, I kind of slowed down on that and took a step back. I didn't know anything before anyone else. But I thought those videos may not have been seen by a lot of people who watch this channel, and by a lot of people I mean maybe 5 of you now. And I thought it would be interesting to revisit them, as I think there's still some interesting things to talk about there, kind of revisit and kind of add my thoughts to them. So we're looking at the UCI video. Is the UCI Stifling Innovation? Well, since that video, the UCI has actually relaxed some of its rules for mountain biking, and we can have mixed wheel size bikes. That's really interesting, as we can now have 29 650B, so 659er, 2050er, the nomenclature doesn't matter, but we can have mixed wheel sizes. And with my views that bike size and bike wheel size should relate proportionally to you as a rider and your experiences and what your intentions is, and for bike fit. And there's lots of reasons why you go for one wheel size or another, but being able to mix wheel sizes is particularly interesting, as it allows to create a different characteristic depending on what the rider wants or where the rider is within the same bike. Now, a few people have been arguing that some folk have been doing this, such as Martin Mays, by just sticking a 29er fork on a 650B bike because GT don't have a race-ready 29er. And there's certainly some credence to that. But that doesn't explain Loch Bruni. So Loic famously hated 29ers, was dead set against them, has obviously had a little bit of a revelatory moment, and on the mixed wheel size bike wins a race. So that's quite an interesting one, and one that I think is just going to spark a whole new wheel size debate, because we are still talking about this. It's been literally over 10 years, and we are still talking about 29ers, this wheel size, that wheel size. So many things go into it that a good rider will be quick on different wheel sizes. But I think what was quite interesting was Greg Minaar said in an interview that Ben Cathro did, I'll put a link to that in the description, is that he couldn't have gone from that short 26er by today's standards to the long and slack 29er. Just couldn't do it. Would have felt weird when he had bikes in the past, when he hadn't developed enough and gotten used to that kind of bike with close to today's numbers. They felt weird and wrong. So that's interesting to think about as well, to perhaps stage progression and movement through bike sizes and frames, which makes a lot of sense, really. You know, a motorbike that is going to win Ironman GT is going to be potentially almost unrideable by someone who just occasionally fair weather weekend rides. So if that's what you know, and then you can go fast on that bike, you might need to kind of go through progressively more technically difficult but also technically capable machines to get to a point of kind of plateau in terms of what the technology can allow. Just, again, more food for thought. Anyway, that's enough preamble waffle. I'm going to stick the video on, and if you stuck this long, you might as well give us a like and sub, and let us know what you think about what was in this video, Try to keep the sick bashing to a minimum, because that's not what we're here to about. We're here to bash the UCI, not here to bash sick. Cool, great, awesome. Here's a question for you. Is the UCI stifling innovation within mountain bike racing? So, the UCI, for those of us who don't know, is the governing body for cycling globally. They're a bit like FIFA or the FIA in football or motor racing, and they set down a series of general regulations and regulations for each individual discipline to allow for fair play and sportsmanship and making sure that everyone's playing by the same rules. And a lot of accusations have been made of them that they're stifling innovation. Yeah, a lot of that is true and kind of hard to argue against. And a lot of it is unfair at the same time. And really it comes down to the soul of what that discipline is supposed to be. But let's look at the UCI's bigger area, its main focus, essentially road cycling. Now, there are a lot of regulations in terms of road cycling and what bikes can and cannot be within road racing. You probably would have heard people talking about whether disc brakes will be allowed within the peloton and things like that. Well, that's a big deal within road riding, because there are certain shapes, sizes, diameters. There's a cookie cutter envelope that if a road frame falls outside of, it's disallowed. And teams have to apply for approval. And if a frame and bike and a fork combination has approval of the UCI, then it can be raced in UCI events. If it's not a UCI event, then you're down to that local federation or that individual race organizer. But if it's getting UCI points, if it's not a UCI legal frame, the marshal's not going to let you race. Now, there is a magic line and a lot of this kind of regulation that states, apart from in BMX and mountain biking. So when it comes to, say, specific frame shape, yeah, mountain biking, BMX, kind of exempt. In fact, entirely exempt. It'd be impossible to take 12 downhill frames and put them through the same hole in the wall and them all be legal within the UCI's limited view is what a real bike should be. Now, how this applies to mountain biking isn't about the shape or what a bike should or shouldn't be, but it's that sticking regulation, that really one that kind of catches everyone, that 007 regulation. So as you can see, that regulation states that all bikes should be accessible to the public and saleable within 12 months of their first being used. So that means all those 29ers that started appearing last year, they need to be on the market this year. Or they can apply for a prolongation. Now, it does say that there's no limit in terms of how expensive these bikes can be or how many have to be sold. So they could essentially say, if you want that 29er Gambler, then it's going to be 75 grand and you can only have it in aluminium, which then we all know is going to be a custom made one by Scott. But they're just putting it there, hiding on their website so that they can work within those regulations. But it also states that further down in those regulations, you can't have one-offs. Any bike made specifically for an event or a rider is seen as a special technical innovation and is disqualified. So you can't like make a Val d'Isole bike, one that's like perfect for that track and only use it on that track. You can't make a Leogang bike park bike and race on that track. You have to make bikes which will be available to everyone. Now, this is why I think this comes down to the soul of what the race is, the discipline is supposed to be. Is downhill or cross country, not enduro because the UCI don't do that, but in these disciplines, are these Formula One? Are they WRC? Are they the Olympics? Or are they something else? Now, if it's Formula One, if you're watching a Formula One race, you fully accept
you can't go out and buy Lewis Hamilton's car. You fully accept you can't go buy those tyres. You fully accept you can't buy those brake pads. It is the height of technical innovation, the height of driving skill and prowess brought together to create the ultimate what is achievable racing format in terms of motorsport. The same goes for MotoGP, WRC is the same, just off-road. We accept within those disciplines that we as the viewing public cannot aspire and attain to that. Now they're already very well established, big spectacle events. Mountain biking isn't. And by making all of the race teams having to use essentially consumer bikes, bikes made for people who aren't the 1%, then it becomes accessible. You can see Aaron Gwynn, see him in a race, say, I want to do that. I want to do what he's doing, and buy that bike for like $6,000 online when the race finishes. This lowers essentially the cost of entry for people participating in the sport. You can view it, you can see it, you can walk into a showroom and ride the same bike as that guy. Sure, you'll have a custom linkage and the fork will be in the Fox Rad program. There'll be a few things in there which you can't have, but you're riding the same chassis. You can't drive the same chassis as WRC, and you can't even sit in the chair of a Formula One car. So that makes the sport accessible. It allows people to see it and say, I'm doing that, which helps create that inflow of riders and progress the sport in terms of the depth of its talent pool. It also changes it from kind of a individual rider sport and builders championship to just the rider. Sure, they've all got different bikes, but there's probably no one out there riding anything that's more than $12,000. That, again, means that the richer teams can't just outspend the poorer teams. If you could have individual one-off bikes and everyone have that Concorde, that F1 bike, that Category B bike, then the Santa Cruzes, the Giants, the Specializeds will outspend the smaller teams and will have a technical dominance and would win. And as there's less money in the sport, they need people to come into it. So by reducing that price of entry for both privateers and race teams, and the fact that a privateer can essentially have the exact same bike as Cathro Minaar in the same series and in the same bike park, that makes that accessible. But is that what downhill should be? Should you watching World Cup downhill, should that be accessible? Or should that be Category B rally cars? Should that be Formula One? We all know that a Formula One car isn't the same type of car you have, but there's an awful lot of industrial engineering lessons learned from driver assist, ABS brakes, energy recovery, that filters down to the cars we have. Sure, over time, but it gets there. It's as much about what we can achieve, both in the technical and the physical, and that's gladiatorial. That's next level. That's like the absolute kind of pinnacle of what you can achieve in that discipline. And are we getting that in downhill if they essentially have to ride bikes that are available to the buying public, that people who don't have those skills can ride? This kind of filters back to my kind of thoughts about what who forward geometry is for. So, is UCI Stifling Innovation? Sure, of course it is. And it isn't at the same time. It kind of depends on what you think downhill should be. Or cross country, same applies there as well. As usual, let's argue this one out in the comments, see what everyone's thoughts on this one are. But it's an interesting one.